Major crossover events are so common in the Marvel Universe these days that they should be begging for change in the streets. Avengers Endgame and its record-destroying box office exploits are proof positive that the bring all of our characters together to fight some universe-threatening menace storyline has firmly become part of the mainstream mindset. But 'twas not always so, my friends. As hard as it might be to believe, there was a time, actually not that long ago, when multi-character crossovers of any kind were a relative rarity, and major events as we know them, with a mini-series attached, were completely unheard of. In this video, we aim to travel back to the very first time that the House of Ideas took all their very biggest characters, stuck them in a blender, and mushed them up into a big sticky superhero-y goop as we examine the history and legacy of Marvel's Superheroes Secret Wars. The year is 1983. Reagan and Thatcher are firmly in political power. Ghostbusters is still 1 year away. Punk is dead. Disco is dead. John Belushi is dead. Dexy's Midnight Runners stand astride the musical world like a mighty denim-clad gypsy colossus. And after a tumultuous 1970s, Marvel had firmly established themselves as the market leader in the comics industry, at least as far as comic sales were concerned. Sadly for them, in 1983 Marvel was lagging very badly in the action figure stakes. Whilst they had had some success with the larger original G.I. Joe scaled action figures in the previous decade, Kenner's Star Wars line had been a game changer as far as toy properties were concerned, allowing 3 3/4 inch action figures to become the industry standard, and kicking off a golden age of licensed toy properties. With the original Star Wars trilogy reaching the end of its natural lifespan after the release of Return of the Jedi, Kenner decided they wanted to have another powerhouse franchise in the bag, and reached a deal with DC Comics to produce a toy line based upon their long-running Super Friends cartoon. Enter Kenner's rival Mattel, who by that time had managed to create their own toy-eyed powerhouse in the form of the Masters of the Universe range. They, however, wanted a slice of that sweet 4.5 inches or so pie, and to have all their bases covered in case superhero toys became the next big thing. It seemed logical to Mattel that if their rivals Kenner were in partnership with DC, then it made sense to work out a deal with DC's rival Marvel. Mattel reached out to Marvel and secured an agreement with Jim Shooter. Shooter was a career wunderkind, having started as a freelance writer on DC's Legion of Superheroes at the age of 14 and risen through the ranks during the subsequent decade and a half to become Marvel's editor-in-chief in 1978 by the venerable old age of 27. By 1983, Shooter's management style, which was very much the buck stops here and your creative tendencies be damned, had led to him becoming a maligned figure in many corners of the Marvel bullpen. Mattel and Shooter reached an agreement to license Marvel's characters for a toy line, but there was a catch. Marvel had to produce a comic book event series to tie in and advertise said toy line. Shooter had been kicking around an idea for a sequel to the earlier Contest of Champions, which had been Marvel's very first miniseries. The proposed follow-up would have been called Cosmic Champions. Shooter was privy to the reader mail, and he knew the things that the fans were clamouring for. I offered an idea that was suggested by a dozen or so correspondents, usually younger ones, in the fan mail every day. One big epic story with all or many of the heroes and villains in it. Shooter pitched the idea to Mattel, who liked the concept but had other ideas regarding the title. They explained that they had commissioned a focus group, which had found that children responded positively to the words secret and wars. This was a process that led to the creation of He-Man's memorable catchphrase, the totally tubular WCW tag team, the Dynamic Dudes, and of course, Funzo. It was stipulated by Mattel that the tie-in comic must have those words in the title. Shooter acquiesced and came up with a treatment that would suit the new moniker, one that would bring all the major players together in a grandiose fashion thus far unseen by the comics faithful. Shooter reasoned that with nearly 3 dozen characters, and with crossovers into 10 separate titles, only he as editor-in-chief had the necessary knowledge of the characters and upcoming storyline directions to write the series. He sent out an edict to the writers of various titles that teasers would be appearing in their books, featuring characters receiving a mental summons from a powerful force of mysterious origin, telling them to visit a huge alien structure. Not all Marvel characters received the summons, however. Only the strongest, the mightiest, the best. also Hawkeye. Once they had entered the alien device, they vanished, with no further information except to check out the upcoming limited series. In May of 1984, Marvel released the first issue of Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, written by Jim Shooter with art by Mike Zeck and Bob Layton. Two groups, heroes and villains, find themselves transported to an alien world constructed from fragments of other planets and are told by a disembodied voice, "I am from beyond. Slay your enemies and all that you desire shall be yours." As far as delivering on its promise to showcase only the mightiest and best characters, Secret Wars delivered. The team of heroes was absolutely the cream of the Marvel crop at the time. The Hulk, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four team minus the pregnant at the time Susan Storm, the Avengers consisting of Thor, Captain America, the Wasp, Captain Marvel, She-Hulk, Iron Man and Hawkeye. And finally, an X-Men team consisting of Professor X, Cyclops, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Rogue, Storm and Magneto. Magneto at the time was in the midst of a subtle face turn in the pages of Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men. The villain team was less robust. Doctors Doom and Octopus, Kang and Ultron were all A-list Avengers level, world-threatening, bona fide supervillain threats. Enchantress and the Absorbing Man were credible second-string bad guys. The Lizard and the Wrecking Crew were cannon fodder, and the Molecule Man was an obscure also-ran, a holdover from the Jack Kirby Stan Lee era of the Fantastic Four. Also with this group was the mighty Galactus, despite the fact that John Byrd's trial of Reed Richards storyline had established that Galactus was neither good nor evil, rather a cosmic force of nature and above such petty distinctions. It would take all day to list everything that happens in Secret Wars, but briefly, the important plot points are, in no particular order, and there are spoilers here. Spoilers for a 35-year-old comic series. Galactus attacks the Beyonder and gets his ass handed to him in the process. The X-Men secede from the heroes' camp for reasons that are never made particularly clear. Something about mutant prejudice and Rogue. The Thing starts to transform back and forth to Ben Grimm, seemingly at random. Magneto kidnaps, seduces, and makes sweet, sweet love with the Wasp. Dr. Doom creates the supervillains Volcana and Titania. The supervillains team kills the Wasp. She gets better. The Molecule Man drops a mountain on the heroes. The Hulk holds it up. The Human Torch and Colossus try to seduce the same random alien. Galactus tries to eat Battleworld. A new Spider-Woman shows up. Wolverine cuts off the Absorbing Man's arm. Spider-Man gets a badass new black outfit. Galactus and Reed Richards have tea. Dr. Doom takes the Beyonder's powers and becomes the most powerful being in the universe. The Molecule Man has his abilities unlocked by Dr. Doom and becomes, stop me if you've heard this one before, the most powerful being in the universe. She-Hulk joins the Fantastic Four. That's a lot of stuff, huh? A reasonable question to ask after that is Secret Wars any good? And the answer to that reasonable question is, it depends upon how you look at it. Seen through the eyes of an objective adult comic reader in the year of our Lord 2020, the answer is no. Secret Wars is shite. Badly written, poorly drawn, nonsensical shite! The major problem is, of course, Shooter's writing, in particular the characterization. The villains are all either dumb mooks or frothing despots, and the hero side is even worse. Magneto, who had been transitioning in the pages of New Mutants to something of a noble father figure, suddenly reverted to the type of demagogue he was in the early X-Men titles, and also a love-a man, apparently. Colossus, who had been in a long-term romantic storyline with pre-teen teammate Kitty Pryde, was suddenly and inexplicably involved in a love triangle with Johnny Storm and a random alien healer. Wolverine's subtle man of mystery routine was reduced to him being a dick. Hawkeye's a dick. Iron Man is a sleazy dick. The Hulk, who at the time had regained the intelligence of Bruce Banner, is a dick. Reed Richards is a dick. They're all dicks. But considered in the context of the time and place it came out, it's a very different beastie. With a massive print and television advertising campaign behind the toy line, the synergy between Mattel and Marvel had the opposite effect than desired. The comic became the success story. Secret Wars sold like hotcakes, and its success was all-encompassing. It set the stage for comics crossovers as we know them, and its influence continues to be felt today both stylistically and storyline-wise. And it was massive amongst a market that has been all but driven off today: kids. I know that as a 6-year-old boy growing up in Troubles era Northern Ireland in 1984, I was so excited by Secret Wars I nearly peed my pants, and that sentiment was not restricted to idiot children living in ridiculous war-torn provinces. Secret Wars was released in numerous international markets. In the UK, it was initially a fortnightly and eventually a weekly title in the slightly larger format that had been the standard in that country for over 50 years. Each 24-page issue contained 8 or 9 pages of Secret Wars, with the rest of the issue being given over to features such as competitions and fact files, and also a backup strip, most notably John Byrne's Alpha Flight, and the excellent toy tie-in Zoids. The actual toy line itself, which as you'll recall was the reason for the comic in the first place, was a mixed bag. It was released with a strong advertising campaign that emphasised the figures, vehicles, playsets, and the toy line's cool gimmick, secret shields. Shield-shaped accessories which told part of the Secret Wars story using lenticular images. The first wave of toys had 8 figures: Iron Man, Captain America, Wolverine and Spider-Man on the face side, and representing the heels were Magneto, Kang, and Doctors Doom and Octopus. Each side had a selection of vehicles, including Doctor Doom's sweet-ass ride, the Doom Roller. The centrepiece of this toy line was the huge Tower of Doom playset. Theoretically, you had the makings of a success story. A strong first assortment of figures with a cool gimmick, along with all the necessary accoutrement to interact with them. But it didn't work out that way. The figures came with a baffling array of accessories. Some, like Dr. Octopus and Wolverine, came with their trademark mechanical arms and claws respectively, which were fine, except Dr. Octopus's arms were brittle and easily broken. Wolverine's silver claws had to be painted black so they looked less like, well, claws. Everyone else came with guns or nothing. Sure, everyone had their secret shield, but that meant Captain America came without his traditional shield weapon. Even worse, Iron Man's shield revealed his secret identity as Tony Stark, when the Iron Man featured in Secret Wars was James Rhodes. More serious issues were featured on the villain side. Magneto was lumped in with the bad guys, despite being portrayed as neither fish nor fowl in the comics. Kang was killed off in issue 4, after spending the better part of 2 issues in captivity. The Tower of Doom in the comics was nothing like the one that appeared in the toy line. Still, the majority of the first wave was featured in some form in the comics. The same could not be said of the second wave. Of the 8-figure second assortment, only one actually appeared in the strip: Spider-Man in his new black outfit. Due to poor sales, only 4 of the final 7, Baron Zemo, Daredevil, the Falcon and Hobgoblin, made it to stores in the United States. The final 3, Iceman, Constrictor and Electro, were shipped off to Europe. The Secret Wars were over. At least as a toy line. The phenomenal sales success of Secret Wars had a number of far-reaching repercussions both story-wise and for Marvel's real-world fortunes. Obviously, the comic demanded a sequel. Secret Wars 2, released in 1986, strangely followed the adventures of the one person in the original that never actually made an appearance, corporeally speaking: the Beyonder. So much mad shite happens in Secret Wars 2 that it really deserves a video in its own right, but suffice it to say that you have not lived until you've read a 44-part crossover story in which an all-powerful being visits Earth, becomes a jumpsuit-wearing Jerry-curl-having pimp, gives birth to a baby version of himself in human form, and then becomes a professional wrestler. You just haven't lived. At the conclusion of Secret Wars, the Thing decided to stay on Battleworld, which it was revealed had the power to fulfill wishes. In his case, he wished to have the ability to transform back and forth to Ben Grimm at will. Grimm stuck around on Battleworld for about 11 issues of his own series before returning home, at which point Battleworld exploded. Absorbing Man and Titania struck up a relationship which has actually endured. They became an on-again, off-again couple for the next 30 plus years, culminating with a marriage in the pages of Avengers Unplugged, a series that lasted 6 issues. They are currently on again, despite Absorbing Man's recent death. The longest lasting piece of fallout from Secret Wars was the introduction of Spider-Man's new costume. After his return from Battleworld, Spidey and his new look were the talk of the town, both canonically and in the real world. Gradually, the Wallcrawler started to become concerned about the new abilities his costume was demonstrating, as well as an unexplainable feeling of exhaustion. After an examination by Reed Richards revealed the outfit to be alive, the source of Spider-Man's exhaustion, and in fact attempting to bond with him permanently, Spidey rejected the alien onesie, which left it bitter and seeking revenge. It bonded with disgruntled and similarly Peter Parker-hating photographer Eddie Brock, and they became the beloved anti-hero and unlikely blockbuster inspiration known as Venom. This, by the way, took place over an unbelievably long time by today's standards. In fact, by any standards. The length of time from the costume's debut till the reveal of Venom took almost 5 years. The success of Secret Wars had a detrimental effect on the ego of Jim Shooter, inflating what was considered by some to be overinflated. Reasoning that Secret Wars did amazingly well, not because it was the first crossover of its kind, featuring all the major characters, but instead because of his amazing and groundbreaking writing, Shooter started shooting out memos to other Marvel writers explaining the correct way to write the characters they themselves had been writing for years. Suffice it to say, this did not go over well. Unfortunately for Shooter, his penchant for butting heads with creators would lead to his demise. By 1987, he was gone from Marvel. 15 years after the comic finished, Secret Wars finally received an animated adaptation over the course of several episodes of the 5th season of Spider-Man the Animated Series. Obviously, the scope and scale of the original could not be matched. The heroes and villains were drastically reduced in number, and the point of the Secret Wars was reduced to the beyonder wanting to see if good was better than evil or vice versa. Ugh. That said, it's a fairly decent adaptation, and well worth the hour or so of your time it'll take to watch. Most recently, Secret Wars has lent its name to one of Marvel's churn-em-out crossovers with a legacy title. 2015's Secret Wars is a much better storyline than its predecessor, but is at the same time much less memorable. Sometimes there's just no beating the original.